Nakhimov will become a serious deterrent factor since it gives the ability to launch cruise missiles.
Okay, it's time for some more megaprojects. Specifically, the Admiral Nakhimov, a nuclear battlecruiser. That's a blast from the past. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tyler Folse. I'm a nuclear engineer with a little over 10 years of experience in the commercial nuclear power industry. From engineering to operations to emergency response. I don't claim to know everything there is nuclear, but I can certainly share some knowledge. Let's see.
She's massive, she's nuclear powered, so she's not your mum, and after
Really?
nearly 3 decades in limbo, Admiral Nakhimov has returned to the sea. Originally designed to spearhead Soviet naval forces against NATO carriers, this 28,000-ton nuclear-powered battlecruiser was mothballed after the USSR's collapse. Too expensive to scrap, too expensive to run. Now, however, after a long and costly refit, she's back. Armed with Caliber cruise missiles, modern air defenses, and blisteringly fast Zircon hypersonic missiles, Nakhimov is not.
So they took an old ship and fitted it with a bunch of modern systems. Okay.
A relic. She's a warning, a Cold War monster updated to haunt the 21st century.
That must have been insanely expensive. Replacing the electronic systems alone would have cost a fortune.
Here's the catch. The ship may be cutting edge, but the Navy behind her isn't.
So a refitted Kirov-class battlecruiser, big, nuclear-powered, heavily armed, is indeed a high-profile signal platform. Nuclear propulsion would give it the endurance and high-speed potential. Though, I'm curious about the cutting-edge aspect, because you can modernize weapons and sensors and electronics in an old hull. It's expensive, but doable. But the ship's effectiveness depends just as much on logistics, the training of the crew, and what kind of sustainability and combat support this thing's going to have. Run into similar issues with, say, any sort of system upgrade, refabrication, or refurbishment of a nuclear power plant. Taking people that were trained on a newly built nuclear power plant, such as Vogtle Units 3 and 4, if I were to take them to the power plant that I used to work at, they would have to go through their own licensing and examination process because the control systems are completely different, and that's exactly what the reactor operators rely on. So there's a challenge there. Plus, this would be a bit like installing a brand new reactor control room in a ship whose steam piping might have been corroded. The new control room by itself won't make the old pipes behave. So I'm curious how much of the ship they had to retrofit.
With budgets tight and maintenance stretched thin, it's unclear if Russia can actually keep this floating fortress operational. So, is Nakhimov a real threat or just a spectacular bluff sailing through borrowed time? Early history. Admiral Nakhimov is one of 4 colossal Orlan classes, Kirov class in NATO nomenclature, by the way. But
okay. Kirov class is the one that I'm familiar with, which makes sense being from a Western country.
The Soviet Union began building in the 1980s. They were to be the centerpieces of the Soviet Navy heading into the 21st century and beyond. Massive, nuclear-powered missile cruisers conceived to best American carrier groups and assert Soviet blue water power globally. Their being nuclear-powered was a bigger deal than you might first appreciate, too, because the Soviets were very sparing with what surface ships they chucked a reactor into, with not a single one of their 6 carriers they ever built getting one, and just being powered by dinosaur juice instead. And a 252 meters
fossil fuels, sure.
long with a full load and displacement of between 26 and 28,000 tons, depending on who you are.
It says 26 to 28 tons right there. That's funny.
The Orlans were among the largest non-carrier surface combatants built since the end of World War II. They were engineered for high speed, able to push out over 30 knots when conditions were at their best, and absolutely stuffed with weaponry, originally including 20 P-700 Granite supersonic anti-ship missiles and additional long-range S-300F Grumble surface-to-air missiles, embodying the Soviet large armament on a fast-hull doctrine.
Okay, so the older weapons here.
As for Nakhimov specifically, though, she was laid down at Leningrad's Baltic shipyard in May 1983, launched in 1986, and commissioned into the Northern Fleet on the 30th of December 1988.
So designed for high speed, heavy strike, and long deployments, all of which nuclear would give the edge in that. Because again, long endurance and high top speeds without needing to refuel. Though it doesn't remove the need for food, aviation fuel, consumables, spare parts, munitions, everything else you need on a supply chain. Just like a nuclear power plant, you need all of the dedicated support systems, even though the nuclear fuel itself will keep the power plant running for 18 to 24 months.
The name Kalinin. Her active career proved remarkably short, though, because following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the absolute economic calamity that accompanied it, the Navy of now independent Russia, who had inherited Kalinin, found that it simply could not afford to maintain such extravagantly large and complex warships. As a result, in 1992, after not even half a decade in service, Kalinin was renamed Admiral Nakhimov and effectively mothballed, her more fragile and expensive systems being sealed up as much as possible to slow her rate of decay in the coming years. Come 1997, she was moved to Sevmash shipyard in Severodvinsk to await overhaul, where she would sit for over 2 decades. Still, though,
so it takes a while, because it's a nuclear power plant on a ship. Putting a nuclear surface ship into long layoff requires draining and securing your systems, defueling or placing the fuel in a safe configuration, sealing it up, and preserving critical equipment. That's very time-consuming and expensive. And spent fuel and reactor work are specialized regulated operations. There's not just radiological control, there's corrosion control, periodic inspections that need to be done at each stage of the process, in addition to just climate control.
That was better than most of her sister ships got, with Admiral Ushakov, the oldest of the brood of 4, being decommissioned in 2002 and then rotting away until 2019 when the decision was finally made to scrap her. Admiral Lazarev, the second eldest, was decommissioned in 1999 and not scrapped until 2021. Pyotr Veliky, however, being the youngest and thus the cheapest to keep running, remained active right the way through to 2022 when she too was laid up in Severodvinsk. They're either imminently about to scrap her now that Nakhimov is returning to service, or they're going to search behind the back of the sofa for enough money to get her going as well. It depends on who you ask. The long road to modernization. As you likely guessed from the fact that she was originally moved to Severodvinsk back in 1997 and is only now re-entering service, the process of reviving Nakhimov has been a prolonged saga of false starts, budgetary hiccups, and ever-shifting deadlines. In fact, her refit was meant to begin all the way back in August 1999, but meaningful work didn't begin for nearly a decade longer still, with it not being until 2008 that technicians even completed basic preparatory steps like unloading her spent nuclear fuel. By 2012, however, with the Russian economy then only resembling a mildly unwell man rather than one who was having his last rites read to him and being measured up for a coffin,
That's an interesting analogy.
proper, detailed modernization project plan, dubbed Project 11442M, was finally finished, laying out how her weapons, sensors, and reactors were all to be fancied up.
So the reason why it took so long, even after the fuel was removed in 2008, that's just one major milestone is defueling. You still have to do radiological surveys and decontamination. You have to do inspection and possibly replacement of the reactor's internal systems. That is to say, the control rod, drive mechanisms, reactor coolant pumps, critical valves. Do any sort of remediation work to as far as corrosion and embrittlement. This thing doesn't sound like it was in service for very long, so I don't know how much of it really had the chance to become embrittled by being in neutron flux for a while, but it still needs to be evaluated. And if there's anything that needs to be done to the secondary plant, such as the condensers, the electrical switchgear, and the layup itself is going to cause some degradation from things like stagnant seawater incursion. So yes, mothballing a ship is going to create its own damage to the ship that needs to be addressed before you try to put it back in service.
For the 21st century. A contract for all of that work was signed in June 2013, reportedly worth 50 billion rubles, or around $800 million, with the aim being to return Nakhimov to frontline service by 2018. A 5-year turnaround, however, proved to be a touch optimistic. Actual
as things often are with any sort of big nuclear construction project.
Physical modernization began in late 2014, when she was moved into dry dock and engineers started ripping out legacy systems. What followed was a pattern familiar in large military projects. Optimistic schedules are repeatedly slipping to the right, with the finish line being pushed back to 2020, then 2021, then 2024, and now, which actually seems realistic as we will go on to see, perhaps 2026. Timeframes weren't the only thing which was swelling and bloating, however, because so too was the budget, with most estimates now coming in at the range of 200 billion rubles. That's a fourfold
that's going to go up,
by the way.
With the
Despite
delays.
the setbacks, however, Moscow persisted, in part because new construction alternatives were even less feasible. For example, Russia had wanted to build this, the Project 23560 Lider, a 19,000-ton heavyweight, all bells and whistles, nuclear-powered stealth destroyer come cruiser, but despite being approved all the way back in 2013, it is now in design purgatory, with the Navy big hats now seemingly spending more time arguing about whether or not it has actually been cancelled than trying to actually build the damn thing. Facing situations like that, Russia's new state armament program, a 2018 scheme that outlined the next 9 years of military development, instead focused on refurbishing existing heavy ships over building new ones. It was sensible enough reasoning, too, as in 2018, 4 Orlan-class hulls did exist in various states of disrepair as compared to Lider, which existed only as a twinkle in the eye of the Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu.
So these cost and schedule blowouts, as far as why this thing got pushed back, I wouldn't be surprised if it was due to technical discovery during inspections. One thing that's looked at during a refueling outage at a nuclear power plant, it's one of the most important things to get your visual inspection teams to inspect all the systems after they've been shut down and drained and everything, and do the sort of things that you can't do when you're online. Because that is what's going to determine the scope of the repair during the outage. Say this is more of a maintenance outage rather than just refueling outage. And that's when you find things like unexpected metal fatigue, degraded insulation, needing a replacement of specialty parts. And with some of this older stuff, it's possible the vendors are no longer operating it. So if they're doing that, plus adding in modern combat systems integration, such as new digital systems for their combat information center, new radar systems, that's not exactly a plug-and-play sort of process. There's probably going to be structural changes needing to be done for their electrical load, cooling, cabling, that sort of thing. Kind of like trying to plug in your old Super Nintendo to a brand new modern TV without any additional adapters, because HDMI ports did not exist back then. Times 1,000.
Kamov returns to sea. And indeed, as we earlier said, 2026 does appear to be the actual finish line, because in 2025, something extraordinary happened. Nakhimov actually sailed. It happened on the 18th of August, when, after almost 3 decades of dormancy, she slipped out of Sverdlovsk to begin sea trials.
Nice.
Tugboats provided escort, and crowds of shipyard workers and Russian nationalists alike lined the pier to watch the reborn battlecruiser ease out into open water. One pro-military telegram channel simply captioned the moment, "The heart of the ship beats again." According to reports from TASS, a state-owned Russian news agency, the initial tests, which are still ongoing as of the time of writing, will be confined to the White Sea, followed by more extensive trials in the Barents Sea at the back end of the year and into 2026. These trials are also likely to be intense because, given that Russia's disastrous 3-day special military operation into Ukraine is currently on day number 1,281, and their sole aircraft carrier, Admiral Kuznetsov, has been largely confined to dry dock since 2017, Russia needs these trials to go well, lest it somehow lose even more military credibility on the world stage, which would be saying something. In fact, it's probably safe to say that Russian military credibility is at one of its lowest points ever, with the only other lower points being 1905, when a Japan that was basically medieval less than a century prior defeated them in the Russo-Japanese War, and in 1918, when they were knocked out of World War I, forced to sign the humiliating Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and lost control of a vast swath of Eastern Europe. So yes, like we say, there's actually a lot riding on these trials. Still, for all the pressure, it does finally look like things are going kind of okay. Reports from Ivestia, a Russian newspaper, suggest that she has been performing within
the boat is moving
expectations during these early phases, though, as ever, because, well, Russia take such claims with a slight precautionary pinch of salt. But if we're going to take such reporting at its word, the immediate priority is systems verification. Propulsion, power generation, navigation, electronics, and communications.
All similar system checks that you would do on any nuclear power plant. Make sure all of its support systems are working. And that's all really checks that you do before you even start up the reactor.
All of those essential core bits. As for all of the exciting bits, i.e. her weapons, the word in Russian media is that they will be remaining capped until mid-2026 when she's due to head over to the Barents Sea for live fire exercises. Even if she clears all of these hurdles, though, Nakhimov still will not be declared ready, and return to frontline service until she completes state acceptance trials, basically one last go-over that acts as Russia's final stamp of operational approval. As for when that'll be done, TASS, RBC, Venomov's.
I mean, it's just like recommissioning a reactor that's been shut down. There's so many steps that you have to take before it enters full power operation and starts actually powering your cities.
Zvezda, RT, and Lenta all give the same answer in their reporting. It'll be late 2026. Whether she makes it across the line or not, though, is only a part of the story, because what really matters now isn't just the fact that she's sailing again, it's what she's sailing with. So then, let's go and have a look at the new Nakhimov, shall we? The new Nakhimov.
Okay.
Bringing Nakhimov into the 2020s meant transforming her armaments and sensors root and branch. Chief among the upgrades was the replacement of her original P-700 Granite launchers, enormous angled tubes embedded along her forward flanks with a modern flush-deck vertical launch system, or VLS, buried within the hull. This change wasn't just aesthetic, it fundamentally altered the ship's missile capabilities and flexibility. Sure. More specifically, the old setup consisted of 2 thin rows of 20 fixed-angle launches for the massive Granite missiles designed for a singular anti-ship role. These were removed and replaced with 10 modular 3S14 UKSK VLS blocks, each with 8 universal cells capable of launching a wide variety of missile types. To say this was a bit of an upgrade would be a bit of an understatement, as now Nakhimov can fire the entire family of caliber cruise missiles, including the anti-ship SS-N27, the land attack SS-N30A, and the anti-submarine SS-N31 variants. And even they are just the tip of the iceberg, because she can now also fire the 3M22 Zircon hypersonic missile.
So all of this upgrade would have required cutting and structural reinforcement of those hull decks, large changes to their blast safety system, because you have different type of ordnance you have in there, so it's got to have a different rating. Definitely some engineering calculations to recalculate the ship's stability and center of gravity, because if it's going to be carrying a lot more missiles in the front, might want to take that into consideration. Power cooling and data interface installations with all these new missiles, as well as safe handling, storage, and maintenance facilities for all these varied missile types that are going to be housed on this thing. Each of which is a heavy engineering project. It's not unlike replacing an entire steam generator with a new model in a reactor. Interface, fit, cooling, all have to be redesigned, not just a simple swap out.
Just in case you needed a reminder, hypersonic missiles are those ones that go 5 times the speed of sound. That's quite quick. In essence, then, Nakhimov has been turned into a massively armed floating missile truck capable of carrying a tailored mix of up to 80 long-range strike weapons at a time.
Okay, so now we're adding hypersonic missiles. Those are going to entail extraordinarily thermal, electrical, and handling challenges, and its own crazy set of logistics, with supply chain for these motors and special avionics, which are probably impacted by various sanctions and manufacturing limits. Not to mention evaluation for their additional boosters and exhausts that would be needed to accelerate a missile to hypersonic speeds. I'm curious if that's really a sustainable fleet-capable asset that this thing is capable of housing and getting a reasonable resupply of. Because after all, they have unique maintenance, magazine, and sensor demands.
Some sources admittedly do speculate that a slightly lower number of missiles may actually be carried when she fully returns to service, but an 80-cell capacity is the design limit, and we've seen nothing concrete that would confirm all cells won't be routinely filled.
Okay, so that's just capacity. That sort of thing is going to depend on mission doctrine, fleet logistics, and just availability of munitions. Sure.
Defensive firepower has also received an equally significant boost. The refit ripped out the cruiser's aging S-300F long-range air defense system and its associated top-down guidance radars, and replaced it with a more advanced surface-to-air missile suite. And you might be asking, well, which one exactly? And, well, actually, Russian officials have been peculiarly coy about exactly what system she carries.
That makes sense.
It's typically believed to be a modernized S-300 variant or S-400 system of some kind. New phased array fire control radars mounted fore and aft betray this upgrade, clearly suggesting that Nakhimov can guide a much larger number of surface-to-air missiles against incoming targets than in its original configuration. Now, we couldn't find any clear Russian reporting on exactly how many of these she carries, but 96 total anti-air missile cells was the most common figure we came across, so, have that as a provisional figure until the Americans take a spy satellite picture of her at some point and figure it out. Those missiles, however many she has, aren't the only air defense Nakhimov 2.0 carries either, as she's also got point defense systems for when things get up close and personal, with her older Kortik units having been swapped out for Panzer M1s. Definitely an upgrade, as if nothing else, the units come with built-in jamming resistance capabilities. They can also belt out 10,000.
Each one of these new systems, he's saying, are going to have their own similar challenges that I mentioned earlier, just with upgrading and adding to a new ship.
Pounds a minute, which is quite a lot.
To an old ship, rather.
Odd. The modernization also bolstered Nakhimov's anti-submarine warfare capabilities. She always carried an array of rocket launchers and torpedoes for such work, but now has added the Packet NK system, a small torpedo launcher package effective against both enemy submarines and incoming torpedoes, and the Otvet anti-submarine missile system. Otvet, to explain further, is essentially a standoff weapon that can be launched from the UKSK VLS. It carries a lightweight homing torpedo that parachutes into the sea near a detected submarine contact. Together, these systems give the ship a layered defense against undersea threats, from close-in torpedo interception to attacking subs dozens of kilometers away. The engineering core of Nakhimov, her propulsion and energy systems, remain centered on nuclear power. They even have the exact same reactors, in fact, twin KN3 units paired.
Okay, so that's one thing. No new reactor upgrades. That makes sense. You'd basically need to design an entirely new ship if you're going to upgrade its reactor. Because that's one of those things where you design the reactor first, and then you build the ship around it.
Up in tandem. But they have been extensively overhauled and modernized. This means that Nakhimov has effectively unlimited range, constrained only by the need to periodically refuel the reactors every decade or so. And also,
okay, so the unlimited range is for the ship's reactors, but that's a bit like saying I can run my nuclear power plant and only have to touch anything once every 18 to 24 months. No, everything is going to need their support systems associated with that, even if it didn't use any of its weapons at all. I mean, the people on the ship still have to eat, and they still go through consumables. They're just not going to run out of nuclear fuel by any chance.
They need to get more food and stuff every 60 days.
There
and
you go.
tying all of those pieces together is a modernized command, control, and sensor suite. While details are not fully public, the refit included installing new radar systems, likely including updated three-dimensional search radars and fire control arrays, and electronic warfare gear. It also stands to reason that Nakhimov's Soviet-era navigation and combat information systems have surely been replaced by digitized equivalents. Even in the budget-conscious Russian Navy, such systems are the norm now, and it does appear that they're trying to do right by Nakhimov, so it would just be a bit weird.
That right there, I'm sure, cost a fortune, just replacing and digitizing all of their old systems.
She didn't get such an upgrade. And then there's her aviation facility, which is basically exactly the same as it was during the old Soviet-era build. There are only so many ways you can upgrade a helipad. As for what she launches, it's Ka-27s or Ka-31s, the former being an anti-submarine warfare model, and the latter being for airborne early warning and control duties. In sum then, the new and improved Admiral Nakhimov is essentially a new ship within an old hull, boasting a potent mix of long-range strike missiles, advanced air defenses, and modern sensors, all propelled by the original nuclear power plant that made the Orlan class such an engineering marvel back in the 1980s. The strategy behind the steal. So far, so straightforward then. We've seen Admiral Nakhimov's pre-refit history, the story of how she returned to the waves, and what she now looks like since Moscow started throwing the rubles around. And yet, what we haven't looked at is how they intend to actually use this thing. So, let's do that, shall we? Fortunately, it's a matter that we aren't exactly lacking for information on either, thanks to the vast amount of analysts and professional military sorts who have given their 2 cents worth to the Russian media. Long story short, as far as Moscow is concerned, she is not a relic of long-lost glories or a mere prestige piece. She is to be the Northern Fleet's centerpiece, a strategic hammerhead built for long-range strikes, area-air defense, and ocean-going coercion. She won't be acting alone, and on a particularly interesting note, she will not be getting sent to Ukraine, or more rather, the Black Sea just beneath it. Sure.
Yeah, for this sort of ship, if you're down to the point where it's a one-of-a-kind thing, it's going to be a pretty big target, so you're going to want to escort it. That makes sense.
Story long, she's going to be spending the bulk of her life up in the waters of the Arctic, with Rossiyskaya Gazeta, a state-owned newspaper, stating that, quote, after modernization, Admiral Nakhimov is expected to become the new flagship of the Northern Fleet.
So interesting. So Arctic operations you're going to have to deal with icing, extreme cold affecting seals on the ship, hydraulic systems, possibly limited support. I mean, I know Russia has assets up there, but still. And the reactor is going to need some level of ambient cooling and consumable supply support. Operating in ice is very manageable, but it's just going to require specific preparations and backup plans. And all of the ship's components will need to be winterized. But on that note, having a nuclear-powered vessel over there will indeed have its advantages, because that's one less thing you have to worry about is refueling the ship.
Although you don't have to read far to find suggestions that she may find herself further afield from time to time, with Mikhail Budchenko, the head of Sevmas shipyard, when speaking to our old friends at TASS, commenting that, quote, the cruiser is capable of carrying out combat tasks anywhere in the world's oceans. Analyst Alexander Timokin reinforces that notion with more specifics, writing in Vzglyad that, quote, the very appearance of such a ship in the North Atlantic will force NATO to divert a disproportionate number of assets. Interestingly, though, in this same interview, he also claimed that she may carry nuclear-tipped armaments at some point, stating that Nakhimov will become a serious deterrent factor since it gives the ability to launch cruise missiles.
Okay, talking about carrying things that are nuclear-tipped. There might be some Russian cruise missiles that are technically capable of carrying nuclear warheads, but deployment of them to a surface ship is a major political and operational decision, and that sort of thing I doubt is going to be publicly confirmed. I've heard the term used as nuclear possible or nuclear capable, specifically referring to carrying weapons, not talking about its propulsion system at all. So that's questionable.
Large quantities. In the case of nuclear warheads, its deterrent effect is comparable to that of a ballistic missile submarine.
All right, I have a problem with that statement as well. Because nuclear-armed submarines, or boomer subs, are stealthy platforms designed for second strike capability after the initial nuclear volley occurs in the event of a nuclear war. Surface ships are a lot easier to spot with long-range sensors and weapons, and by extension, less survivable against mass attacks, precision strikes, just because submarines are a lot harder to find. So I would put this in the category as more of a conventional power projection tool, not unlike a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, for instance. Might not be on the same scale. I mean, it is ultimately a smaller vessel, but it's closer to that as far as what it looks like. More of a power projection tool rather than a strategic nuclear deterrent. This doesn't seem like it would replace nuclear missile-armed submarines as far as fitting that particular role.
End quote. So you might be thinking, well, why didn't we mention this rather big detail back in the last chapter, Simon? And that's pretty simple. It's just because we couldn't verify it at all. And when we say we couldn't verify it, the Center for Strategic and International Studies only describe her caliber cruise missiles as high explosive, possibly nuclear capable. And similarly,
he even combined the two. Not just nuclear possible versus nuclear capable, possibly nuclear capable. I kind of like that, actually, because we just don't know.
National Air and Space Intelligence Center of the United States Air Force only described them as nuclear possible. In other words, caliber being nuclear capable at all is yet to be confirmed, never mind such missiles then finding their way onto the Nakhimov. Now, to bring it back to the matter at hand, that being what the Russians say they're going to be doing with the Nakhimov, another thing they are very clear about is the fact that she will not be operating without support, as evidenced by Vladimir Maltsev, the head of the all-Russian.
Yeah, this thing's way too big of a target for it to operate without support. It's like expecting an aircraft carrier to operate without escorts.
Fleet Support Movement, who, when speaking to TASS, simply said, quote, ships die because they operate alone. Timokhin once again gives more specifics, stating 3 or 4 ships capable of operating in the ocean zone together with the cruiser will form a strike fist that NATO's entire northern flank will have to stop.
That's clearly just posturing, but sure, it needs to be escorted.
End quote. Now, that sense of orchestrated reach is also tied directly to missile use. Russian naval journalist Ilya Kramnik, for example, quoted in RBC, argued that ships like Nakhimov are essential if Russia wants to project anything beyond its coastlines. To quote him, if there is a need to ensure presence in the oceans, then ships like Nakhimov are necessary. End quote. Now, in that model, she becomes Russia's most visible naval signal, a forward-deployed warning that it can reach targets ashore and afloat across thousands of kilometers. The ship's real analog isn't an aircraft carrier. It's a mobile missile farm that can show up, fire salvos, or at least threaten to and then move on.
Though it's closer to the aircraft carrier as far as a power projection analog than the submarine. But I get what he's saying.
Importantly, though, and we really want to stress this point given, the news, Russian outlets also make it clear that Nakhimov will, in all likelihood, not be deploying to the Black Sea to assist with the ongoing war against Ukraine, with Colonel Mikhail Kordonkov writing flatly in Rossiyskaya Gazeta that, quote, the participation of Nakhimov in the special military operation is highly questionable, end quote. And frankly, you can get
That's
why
not something
too,
they're
because
gonna announce
it's
anyway.
just impractical to do so. You see, the Black Sea is largely closed to ships like the Nakhimov thanks to the Montreux Convention, which Turkey does enforce quite proactively. So, is it worth Russia risking another diplomatic incident with one of its neighbors just to move a single warship into position? And at the minute, the answer's no. No, it's not. And even if they could get through, a ship such as the Nakhimov just doesn't make tactical sense in the Black Sea. She's designed for picking off targets at distance in protected conditions, and between the sea's size and the fact that a not insignificant portion of its coastline is festooned with Ukrainian missile batteries, all of them eager to bag the next Moskva, such conditions, they're just not right for the ship, are they? Simply put, it's not a tactical tool for that theater. It's a strategic tool for others.
Sure.
Well, of course, if you ask Russian sources, they absolutely could send it to the Black Sea if they wanted. They just don't want to. Timokhin, for example, when making that claim, evidenced it by stating that if the air defense system is in proper condition, then no single missile attack is dangerous. It works, and the crew are trained. That is the real...
A lot of these claims being thrown out are just speculative and baseless.
In the end, then,
weird.
Admiral Nakhimov is not being sold to the Russian public as a symbol of nostalgia. It is being presented as a usable weapon system, a political lever, and a theater-shaping tool, one that NATO now has to budget around. Now, of course, we have to ask ourselves how much of the official Russian narrative we actually believe, and indeed, if you ask Western analysts their take, the average response is far more negative. Dmitry Gorenberg of the Center for Naval Analysis, for example, highlights the steep erosion of Russia's post-Soviet shipbuilding talent, with Russia inheriting a lot of experienced talent when the Union collapsed, the oldest of which has long since passed away, and the youngest of which is now not far off pension age. Has Russia done enough to nurture their talents and pass them on to the new generation? Certainly, there's been no shortage of effort to do so across the defense and aerospace sectors.
So what I will say about this is anything to do with reactor operations is going to require extensive reactor safety and training on their personnel. The training is not going to be a one-time thing either. It needs to be recurring. Drills need to be regularly conducted, and you need to have a strong safety culture. So a mothballed ship restarting after decades is going to require retraining crews. Possibly the trainers would never have operated the old ship, refreshing procedures, and just regaining that memory. This was a challenge, again, that occurred during the build of Vogel Units 3 and 4, just because it's been so long since new nuclear power plants were built in the U.S. So if these training pipelines and regulatory oversight have eroded, which I'm sure they have, operational risk and maintenance backlogs are going to increase. Now, I'm not necessarily saying this is going to be a mobile Chernobyl, but having a bottleneck around people is a real challenge that the nuclear industry has and is in the process of overcoming. But with a Navy that has a really old ship they're bringing back that hasn't been operated in a while, yeah, I'm sure those challenges are going to absolutely be compounded.
Which is the exact reason why Russia keeps the Il-96 jet in production despite the fact that no one is buying them and continues to push ahead with advanced designs like the T-14 Armata tank when any other nation in Russia's economic position would just buy foreign off-the-shelf designs. And further still, the fact that Nakhimov is now back out at sea, seemingly without any major disasters having occurred, would imply that yes, Russia's actually got this covered. But don't forget, maintenance, logistic, and sustained development can be rather more tricky things to master than simply building a ship. I mean, just ask the Admiral Kuznetsov how she's getting on if you want evidence of that. That is also something that Siddharth Karshal of the Royal United Services Institute comments on, with him drawing attention to the fact that the Russian Navy is moving away from capital ships and towards a force centered on corvettes, frigates, and submarines, specifically because, in his opinion, they simply cannot support the big sexy stuff anymore.
I was going to say, if they're going to focus on something smaller and possibly more cost-effective.
Either financially or logistically. And here's a relevant thought of our own that we wanted to throw in too. One could easily argue, couldn't they, that the dire strait of Kuznetsov could simply be an outlier. Perhaps she simply had a crap design that for one reason or another really didn't lend itself to long-term sustainability. But hold that thought, because see, this old girl, she's Kuznetsov's younger sister, the Varyak, who today, sailing as the Liaoning, works an absolute treat as China's first aircraft carrier. No mid-voyage failures, no years on end spent in port being repaired. She just works. And consider this as a...
That is one thing with some of these larger ships that they didn't build very much of. You just don't have the data points necessarily because there's just not that many ships to work with.
Another point, Pyotr Veliky, the Orlan that stayed in service, was chugging away absolutely fine until late 2022, when she was laid up in Sverdlovsk, remaining there until the present day. So between the fact that there's no fundamental issues with the Kuznetsov-class design, and that Russia does indeed have worn-out capital ships starting to pile up in its ports, it really does seem to be a possibility that Russia has simply lost the ability to properly service capital ships at this point. Will that prove to be true?
I mean, that could be a bit like trying to operate a nuclear power plant when your aftermarket supply chain for steam turbine blades has vanished. Can operate for some time, but long term, yeah, you're going to run into problems.
Well, Nakhimov proved to be a fantastic ship, briefly, before slowly rotting away as she sails and then finding herself once again moored up and out of action. Or, as the Russian sources suggest, as Moscow simply acquired itself a cracking new flagship that's going to scare NATO for many years to come.
One thing that was left out of this was all the talk on environmental and radiological risks, because work on naval reactors, spent fuel handling, and refit activities are going to have local environmental and regulatory safety implications. And this long layup is going to increase complexity and the cost of decommissioning or restart. And public sensitivity and regulatory scrutiny are real constraints to operations. Accidents or poor handling can carry serious political risk. But I'm not overly optimistic about this, just vessel and its sustainability, but we'll see. Thanks so much for the recommendation, and thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.